Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
So we're taught as children that if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Now, it's pretty obvious that too many of us don't follow that advice these days, and that raises some really interesting questions. What value, if any, is there in remaining silent? Are there times when silence is not golden? Is it ever better to engage in verbal vomiting? And are the rules different for close relationships? So Dr. Aaron Ben-Zeev, professor of philosophy and former president of the University of Haifa, and the author of the upcoming book, The Arc of Love, How Our Romantic Lives Change Over Time, is back to help answer these and I'm sure some other questions about when to speak and when silence is the better path when it comes to love. So Dr. Ben-Zeev, Aaron, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.
And in your recent article titled, Is Silence Golden in Love?, which appears in Psychology Today, you talk about the role of silence in two models of love, the caring model and something called the dialogical model. So what are these two models and what role does silence play in each of them?
When discussing the philosophy of love, there are two major models. One is the caring model, the second is the dialogue model. The caring model is very common sense. It is saying that care is important in love. Love should focus on the beloved needs. Without question, caring is indeed central in romantic love. It goes beyond a positive attitude toward the other and merely the wish to be with the other, but seeking to enhance the beloved well-being. The care model is most relevant in loving relationships such that involve significant inequality like parental love, love of God, or love for someone who is unwell. So this is the first most prevailing model. A second model, which is more relevant to a romantic love, considers the shared connection between the two partners as the essence of love and views shared emotional state and joint activity as the foundation of the connection. Here, what is important is the connection, the reciprocity between the connection. The connection amplifies the flourishing of the lover as well as their relationship. Unlike the care model, the dialogue model emphasizes the importance of reciprocity, autonomy, and the equality in establishing the romantic connection. These are the two basic models. There is no doubt that both models indicate important part of romantic love. We cannot speak about romantic love if there is no caring. However, we cannot also speak about romantic love when there are no interactions between the two partners, no dialogue between them. So both of them indicate an important aspect, and the issue is the emphasis in each one of them. So in parental love, caring is more important, and in romantic love, dialogue is more important, although, of course, caring is very important as well.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is the two models aren't mutually exclusive when we're talking about romantic love. They both play a role and they're both important.
Precisely. However, some extreme formulation of each view may speak about their exclusivity. For example, the care model, there is a philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who said that in love, we should not care about our own needs, only the needs of the beloved. Therefore, love is not reciprocal. It should be only focused on the beloved. This may be true in parental love, but also in parental love, the parents want some reciprocity with the children. They invest a lot in the children, and they want also some reciprocity. But in parental love will continue almost no matter how the children will behave.
As a parent, I can agree with that. Sometimes I didn't much like my children, but I always loved them.
Of course, and as long as you give them sufficient money, they will love you as well. Okay, but this is parental love. No, hardly reciprocity, hardly dialogue, but of course also in parental love, dialogue and activity together are important. However, in romantic love, the dialogue is crucial. You cannot keep on loving each other while merely watching TV together, and that's all your interaction. The interaction should be more meaningful, should be feeling both of you thriving, should be bringing out the best from each other. This is romantic love. And if you will feel this way, then you will want to stay. If you will feel that nothing developed and your personal thriving is not it's hardly done, then you will not stay in the marriage. Marriage should enhance the flourishing of each partner and their togetherness. In order to do so, we need dialogue. In order to bring out the best of each other, they have to work out together. They have to interact together. They have to talk together. So the dialogue emphasizes talking and interacting together.
So by the description of the dialogue method of romantic love, how is silence problematic? It sounds like by remaining silent, it could really cause problems.
Yes. Depend here, if you're with the position of being silent all the time with your partner, of course you cannot interact with him, and this is a problem. For the long run, the interaction is most important for the long run. There are studies which indicate that interacting with each other increase the quality of the relationship and their length. As the saying goes, pray together, stay together. But it is not merely pray. It's doing together, staying together. It is all such activity that are meaningful. So, therefore, the dialogue is very important. However, there are times when you don't want to speak out your mind. Our emotions are expressed sometimes in a very extreme manner. And extreme manner that does not reflect what we really feel. But what we feel in this moment, in this second. Sometimes people say, I hate my partner. I love you, I hate you, love you, hate you. And actually, in this time when you feel hate or outrage toward your partner, I would recommend to you, be silent. Here, silence is golden. Don't speak out your mind when you are extremely upset. Leave the speech later on when you will be calmer. We speak about counting to 10 when we are angry. Why to count on 10? Don't express, give 10 seconds for your emotions to calm down, and then to the intellectual system will brought in, and then your expression will be more moderate and more optimal, because it will combine both emotion and the intellectual. It will be kind of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And it's and that is something that I always recommend, that, you know, telling people not to open their mouths when they're really emotionally upset, because it generally doesn't work very well. And so I'm right on board with that. This is Happily Ever After is Just the Beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking about the role of silence in romantic relationships with Professor of Philosophy and the author of the forthcoming book, The Arc of Love, How Our Romantic Lives Change Over Time, Dr. Aaron Ben-Zeev. And if silence is more than just a temporary state in your relationship, or if there are other challenges around speaking up or being heard, I invite you to get a copy of my ebook. It's Not About the Dishes, How to Identify What You're Really Fighting About So You Can Finally Stop. And that's available on my website. You can get it at www.foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, N is coaching, N is in Nancy, C is in Charlie.com. So I want to get back to Dr. Ben-Zeev and talking about speaking and not speaking in a romantic relationship. So one of the things you were saying is that there are times when remaining silent can be helpful. So we were talking right before the break about counting to 10, waiting to say something. Are there other times when remaining silent is helpful? I mean, there's the book whose author I can't remember. Don't sweat the small stuff. And so, are there times when we should just let things slide and not say anything, or how does that play into the dialogue model, or the?
Yes, there is a story of a man dating a woman for the first date, and after the first date, he asked her, "Do you love me?" And she said to him, "I loved you, but then you began to speak." So here, in the first day, don't speak so much. But this is not possible, because she will see that you are not the most wise person on the earth later on when you will need to speak. We don't want to speak in cases where the speech will just harm us. The conversation will harm us. We need optimal circumstances for a conversation. And sometimes for example, in good manners, sometimes you should not speak. You should not emphasize all the time the flaws of your partner. All of us know that your partner has a flaw, and he knows and you know, but you should not speak about them again and again and again.
Well, I've got to tell you, my mother-in-law told me that my husband was practically perfect. So I may have to be careful about that.
Indeed. Then you should say no more. Just cite the source, your mother.
Right.
Not giving your opinion on her view. But if you disagree, of course, if you agree, but you should not discuss your own personal problem on the show. Yes.
So you talked about, and yes, discretion is important. And
yes.
You know, one of my ex-brother-in-laws would undermine my sister in public all the time, which was really quite awful. And I think, I do think that there's this idea, and I was talking about in the introduction about verbal vomiting, where it's just like, well, I'm just being honest. I'm just sharing the truth with you. I'm just, letting it all hang out, so to speak. And that can be harmful too, can't it?
Yes, you are absolutely right. Speaking is a value, is a virtue, but it has its own condition. It is not a virtue in all situations. You cannot speak out your mind in all situations. You cannot say in public what you want to say to your partner. You may say to your partner in private. In public, where other people are, good manners are those in which you show your love to your partner, not the one that you downgrade your partner. You should not downgrade their, never you should do it, but especially not in
not in public, right?
We should use it wisely. Otherwise, we shall inevitably will say nonsense. If we speak all the time without letting ourselves think whether the circumstances are right or what will go on, we shall just say inevitably we shall say nonsense or hurting the others. And we should avoid hurting the others. And words can kill. Words can be very harmful. So
yes, they can.
So we should be careful when speaking and not saying all the time what at the moment we feel.
So I want to go back to something that you just said a moment ago about the conditions being right to speak. So, and I talk a little bit about that with my clients, but can you share what the conditions should be to have either both, I guess, a difficult conversation, but also a connecting conversation?
Yes, we should first distinguish between an experience which is short-term and experience which is ongoing, enduring experience. When silence is ongoing, enduring experience, it is bad for the relationship, no matter what. You cannot be silent with your partner. However, when silence is in specific circumstances, it can be good for this moment, but then you should talk it over. Usually, talking thing is helpful, but not all talks. I mean, sometimes there are issues that you don't want to discuss. For example, if two people are beginning to date, and then there is some song, the woman say, I want to know everything about it. Tell me all about your past lover, but don't dare do it. Yes. She wants to know about his past lovers, but she knows that he should be silent about it because it will hurt her.
Okay. So how do people figure out, and because this is something that I run into a lot, and I'm sure you do too, where people use silence, either is the silent treatment, which is a particular form I think is borderline abusive in a relationship, but also because they're trying to avoid conflict. They don't want to have just these difficult conversations, kind of like what you're talking about. I want to know about your past lovers, but I don't want to know about your past lovers. How do people decide? Are there any kind of, I don't want to say checklist, but is there any kind of procedure or process to help people figure out when they should talk and when they should have a conversation or talk about a particular topic or when they shouldn't?
The first thing is that silence can be a good reaction for example, when you are insulted, when your partner insults you.
Okay.
You may take this position, which is good in the sense that you clearly indicate to your partner your dissatisfaction from his behavior, but you don't make it worse by reacting hostilely, in a hostile manner.
Okay.
So silence is better than hostile reaction. However, silence has a limited duration, should have limited duration. After, let's say, an hour or less than an hour, half an hour, then you should bring it out and speak about it. But then at that time, after such a time, you both will become, your message that you were insulted was delivered, and now you should talk about it.
Okay.
This is a good tactic. For example, for this reason, never go to sleep while you are upset and you are silent about it. Because then you carry the hostile silence through the night, you and your partner. You can be silent a little bit before, a little bit immediately after the partner insults you, but then before you go to sleep, you should talk it out. You should not go
as long as you're talking and not arguing.
Yes, precisely. Talking and not arguing, not trying to persuade that you are the best and she is the worst. Just trying to see each other's perspective. Because if both of you love each other, none of you want to hurt each other. So it happened because of certain circumstances, because you were nervous, she was tired, and so at that time you could disconnect from talking. But then you should go back.
That's an action of intention, which I think sometimes gets lost, especially when we get emotional. It's hard to stay intentional. We become reactive. But I want to go back to the article and talking about and the concept of the dialogue model of romantic relationships, because you point out that there's a connection between silence and separation. And I'm not talking about necessarily physical separation. I'm talking about emotional separation. So what is that connection?
The connection is that silence is a kind of separation, disconnection. I mean, he said something, you didn't, you don't like it, you disconnect. You just don't talk. And this is a kind of escape device. Escape devices are good in very specific circumstances and for limited time. There are times, for example, when both of you are very upset, very emotional, that disengagement is good and silence is good. But this is merely for a specific brief time. Escape, you cannot escape life. You cannot escape conflict. You can at the beginning try to deal with the conflict by escaping it in the very first moment or hour or so. But later, the conflict, you have to deal with it because the conflict does not disappear. The conflict remains. So silence cannot be forever.
Right. I tell people that you can postpone conflict, you can't avoid it. And usually the longer you postpone it, the worse it gets. But
there are studies, by the way, that indicate that it is not the number of conflict which determine the quality of the relationship, not up to a point, but the manner in which we solve the conflict. And
absolutely. So, but
talking is one way of solving it.
I do want to ask something else, because I think we've been talking about intentional silence, which can create a sense of separation. But there's something that's going on right now that I don't think people see it as intentional silence, but I'm wondering if it has the same effect. And this is the wonderful world of technology, where we have our smartphones, we have our iPads, we have our computers, and we're kind of, and I think you alluded to it in the beginning of the conversation, where we may be sitting in the same room with each other, but we're not talking to each other. We're focused on our individual devices. I see this all the time when I go out in public and I want to just throw my cards all over the table. It's like, okay, people, you need to come see me. Because I think people don't understand that also constitutes silence, doesn't it?
I completely agree with you. This is when you are going to dinner together and each of you with your smartphone, it is silence and improper silence. Because going out, you should talk. You should make the going out meaningful by talking. This is not for other things. Turn off the smartphone and talk. And another example is when people have online relationship or people just don't answer in this online relationship or in WhatsApp or whatever, they don't answer. This is a clear message that I was heard, that you didn't behave well. And this is a message which can go through, but again, should be limited. And quite quickly after you show your dissatisfaction with the situation, you should begin to talk again and try to solve the problem.
Right. And talking in person is really important. Trying to have these difficult conversations through text or online is, to me, just a disaster waiting to happen. But so this has been a really interesting conversation, and I think a very important one, because I think people are really, really confused about how to communicate with each other, when to communicate with each other, and I really appreciate the description of the two models, of the caring model and also the dialogue model, and the importance of being able to talk with our romantic partners. So can you tell people where they can find out more information, one, about the book you've got coming up, but also about the articles you write, about communication and everything that you're doing?
Yes, communication is, of course, crucial. Communication, dialogue are crucial to romantic relationship. You can find it in my blog on Psychology Today, In the Name of Love. I wrote over there many posts. Some of them are dealing with these issues. And of course, in my forthcoming book, it will be out in June by University of Chicago Press, in which I deal with the problem of romantic love through time. How we change through time. And we change through communication. And speaking and dialogue is essential feature in this aspect. So, yes, caring is important, but interacting is not less important, and for the long run, it is as much as important, and sometimes even more.
And I heartily agree. And so I want you to remember that the adage, act in haste, repent in leisure, can apply in trying to decide if silence in your relationship is helpful or harmful. It's always wise to take a deep breath before speaking, but not breathing for too long, in other words, remaining silent, can kill you and your relationship too. So learning how and when to be silent or to speak up is important for creating a healthy and happy relationship. So hopefully you will continue listening to the show. And until next week, stay loving.